What's up, Wolf? Nice to have you here. How you doing, man?
Good. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good. I'm in Sweden here. It's super cold, dark, but at least they have the new patch coming.
Yeah, that's the light at the end of the tunnel. I think for a lot of people right now, right? Everyone's wondering, is this the week where it's going to go push to live? And everyone's hoping, a lot of the tournaments and show matches that are happening right now are going to be on live, or rather going to be on PTR, but then they always end up being on live. And everyone's like, oh no, Shanghai Masters was on live. We didn't get to see the new patch. There's a lot of a lot of kind of waiting and hoping that this patch is going to come out soon.
Do you think there would be a lot of outrage if we had to wait one more week?
I don't know if there would be like outrage per se, but I do think people would be like, all right, listen, they pushed some of the crazy changes that ended up being really bad for the game forward without even testing them on PTR. And these ones seem pretty good overall. And people, obviously practicing with this a lot. And a lot of people are doing pickup games and stuff like that with these notes. So I do feel like people are like, all right, they seem fine. It's time to push it forward. I mean, there's a lot of theories right now about like, are they going to release a bunch of new skins or something soon, and they want to do it on the same patch? No one really knows for sure, but I guess there's always the chance that they're about to release some new content, and that's why they're waiting.
I feel like with the pro scene, they tested out a lot of how to say different stuff in pugs, and now I know from scrims, they in contenders at least they really quickly settled on just Orisa comps. And because of only EU producing any content about the meta, sort of everyone else following whatever EU played, Rhino Orisa, then Orisa Hog, Mayhanzo, etc. Have you seen similar things in Korea? Like if you ever had any chance to, how to
I
say,
haven't. Yeah,
see
I haven't
anything?
watched any scrims, but I've definitely talked to some people who scrimmed in Korea, and I've kind of seen like what their thoughts on what everyone's playing right now. It seems like Ryan Arisa is definitely the main standard at the moment, and obviously like because of the reduced barrier health for Arisa and Ryan, like Hanzo is very powerful because it can help break through those. And I think everyone's kind of like, if you look at the patch notes in general and you think about them, like it feels like this trend isn't that surprising because you have huge buffs to Ryan. He can move a lot faster and hold a shield. His shield is now like the best shield. I mean, in terms of
Mm.
hit points. I mean, it always was, but it's like he's more mobile, so he has this great shield. And you have, Arisa's shield much, reduced hit points by 300. So it feels like, okay, I've got to break through these shields somehow. They're a lot easier to break through. So Hanzo just becomes meta as a result, right? And Mei is one of the best ways to deal with these tanks, the front lines, because we kind of have what, like two main tanks in
Mm.
this meta, at least the meta that we're seeing. So Mei and her ice wall and her CC really help to like prevent them from walking forward. Because right now with Arisa's extra armor, she kind of just like walks up on top of you and puts her little gun to your head, and
Mm.
she's like, "I'm not hiding behind a shield anymore. I'm walking right up to you."
You remember before the Moth meta, right, when Mercy was super OP and had like 2 instant reses? Uh,
Yeah.
we in Fuel, we played some Orisa Hog, for example, and back then I think it was pretty much the same type of Orisa, the same armor, a bit weaker Fortify, stronger shield, of course. But would you say that we are a bit, as the pro scene, biased towards more tanky stuff or like tanky compositions and not as much dive as before because of playing more tanks recently? Because before that, everyone played dive into Orisa, or they would run over you with a Ryan, Zarya, Lucia, for example. What's your take on that?
So you mean like why are people more reluctant to run dive
Yeah,
nowadays when they used to run it before?
yeah. Like why do they force so much Orisa Ryan, for example? I know it's really strong, but does it feel like it's a bit limited experimentation so far?
I do kind of feel that way, I feel like especially when, Vancouver was running a lot of Genji, for example, at the end of the season last year. We were seeing it, exclusively on Anubis. After Vancouver was doing it, everyone else started kind of adapting to it. But Tracer as well, like something that we saw very little after the 2-2-2 lock. We saw like Sinatra play it a few times, and there's always that one Tracer player who like swaps to get back to the point, then they have to stay on it. But I think that ever since the level of play in Overwatch got much higher than it used to be, because
Mm.
when Dive was like super meta in like 2017, 2018, like everyone was still getting better. I feel like we've reached a new level of mechanics across the board. We've got all these new young players who are rising superstars. I think dealing with Dive back then was a lot harder to do because we would just have like a
Mm.
Diva, Winston, and a Genji in your face as Zen, and you're like, well, I don't know, my team doesn't know how to peel as at that time they didn't know how to peel as well as they do now, and people didn't react as quickly. People's aim wasn't as good. And I think
Mm-hmm.
now it's just harder to execute dive. Like before, you could get like a triple kill with a Genji without Dragon Blade. Even sometimes, if you were like really good and the other team didn't react properly, you could just have like a Tracer Winston dive through. You get the dash resets. But now you feel like you're kind of farming for Dragon Blade when you're playing Genji. You know what I mean? Like when you're
Yeah.
playing Anubis attack, you're kind of just like you got a Mercy pocketing you. You're trying to farm Dragon Blade, and in this new patch, it's going to be a little bit easier because you'll have just a little bit extra ammo. But it never really feels like you can really make dive work outside of Dragon Blade pushing. And I think the reason why is just because everybody's better than they used to be. Like everybody's shot calling is better.
Mm.
So dive just fundamentally is harder to win with.
Would you say maybe we're gonna see how to say more utility then to stop these tanks just running over you? Maybe Sombra, to hack an Orisa before 45, or something else like more Ana play instead of just BAP plus whatever else, What's the playstyle that you think will come
Well,
in
yeah,
Overwatch League?
I hope the Sombra stuff you're talking about like could end up happening because I am a little bit worried that we're gonna get to this different variation of a meta that people are excited about originally because Ryan is back, but could become stale where you're seeing BAP every game, and then you have just it's so incredibly difficult to run anything else besides Mei or Hanzo. Even McCree is kind of like a liability. I mean, there's some maps where you could make him work potentially with sightlines, Gibraltar, for example, and even Widowmaker, I mean, could find a place depending on, the maps. Like, again, Gibraltar comes to mind because of, kind of how A works, for example, and how C works. But I would love to see more Sombra play, trying to hack people, trying to maybe set up for like a hack Reinhardt charge or something like that. I mean, that sounds like a cool idea. Like, in theory, you hack the Orisa, like you were saying, stop the fortified, and the Reinhardt just like charges in. And that could be cool. But I wonder, like, I wonder if one team will try something different, something like Chengdu, Hunters will try something different. They'll come up with their own style. Because from what I'm hearing, just generally speaking, people have tried a few other things, and people have tried Sombra a little bit. They have tried running McCree. They've tried running the Wrecking Ball into some of these compositions, and it's just not working that consistently yet. So I feel like teams are just going to be afraid to try something different, and whatever the meta settles on, which sounds like Orisa and Reinhardt, but I mean obviously a little bit of Roadhog and some other variation. Whatever the meta settles on feels like that's where we're headed right now.
Would you say maybe the teams are afraid of going for these alternative comps because it's so easy to just make a simple switch? Like, let's say that you're playing Hanzo plus something, and then you're not facing anything that requires a Mei to counter it. But then, let's say that the enemies run Reinhardt plus Zarya, and you pick a Mei. The enemies have then to switch their whole core. Would you say it's for that reason, or because of just the playstyle or understanding of the heroes?
I think you're definitely making a good point in terms of having to swap your core. That's I think part of the reason why goats became so popular, because if you end up getting snowballed or rolled over by goats when you're running a really technical comp against it, and then you just had to swap, you were just so far behind in terms of your ult charge and stuff like that. But I think there's also a little bit of another factor going on here where everyone's been practicing Orisa recently, right? Everyone's been
Mm.
practicing Mei recently. So you feel really comfortable, even if though Orisa plays a little bit differently, Mei has to play a little bit differently that she did, say in like stage 4 of the Overwatch League or the playoffs. You feel like you have this player on your team who's a specialist almost at this point because of how much he's played the hero and how much he's practiced the Orisa the Mei, for example. And then it just becomes easier to kind of do something similar to what you were doing before that's just more meta. And I think that's part of the reason why a lot of teams fell behind, for example, when we saw for a long period of time, Sombra goats kind of became the standard, whereas before it was just regular goats. Then Sombra started getting into the mix and divas were removed, and then suddenly the whole meta changed. But it took a lot of time, and some of the teams that just weren't willing to give Sombra a shot were falling behind really quickly. So
Mhm.
I guess we could see something like that happen where teams are just like, well, this is what I know, this is what I want to run, this is what we're best at. And then slowly over time, like a few teams figured out. I mean, Shanghai, for example, figured out how to play Pharah against goats really well. Pharah Widow we saw from them in stage 3. I mean, eventually the meta will shift and people will learn those new strategies. But I think at the beginning, it's just this feeling of comfort that teams have
Yeah.
right now, almost more than anything else.
I feel the same because Sombra, was she discovered in contenders perhaps, like the Sombra goats, or was it Scream meta that Shanghai or someone else brought in?
I mean, in with the Sombra in particular, I know that Element Mystic was running a lot of Sombra goats in Contenders Korea, and I know a lot of people were scrimming Sombra, but nobody really felt like they had the
Yeah.
like when just talking to Overwatch League teams, no one really felt like they had the synergy worked out yet. Like they were like, "Oh, this seems strong." But I'm not ready to play it in a really important match we have coming up in 2 days, and so I just have to keep practicing it, kind of thing. It's a really hard meta to play, and it's a really hard meta to play against, and create a lot of frustration for I think especially support players, the Anas and Lucios out there that had to try to save everybody. But yeah, I mean, I think that that sort of struggle to adapt could be something that hurts players once we get past this original PTR meta, so to speak, that we're
Mm-mm.
on right now.
Speaking of having a match in 2 days or struggling to adapt, teams that aren't Vancouver, teams that aren't Shock Kicks, for example, will they benefit from the traveling, so to say, in some way, the time between matches, or would it still be the same type of issues? Because before Overwatch League, you would have more tournament meta, where you have a month or 2 months even to tailor some strats and not even show anything in gameplay footage on streams, and then you put it out in a tournament and you completely win a match, or you can flop as well. But like in Apex,
Yeah, yeah. You mean like
yeah,
kind of like one-off strategies oftentimes even, or like you're the first person to do something that no one else is doing,
yeah.
or no one else has really done before. Yeah, I wonder if that's actually a good point. I wonder how much scrim time teams will really have next year compared to this year, because this year obviously and everyone's in LA, and unless we're talking about playoffs where teams are taking breaks because they're just done, they're not playing in playoffs. Generally, you have like a lot of good practice around in the stuff like what we had this year. But next year, there's gonna be a lot of teams like on planes all the time. People are gonna be exhausted. People get back from their homestand, and then they're gonna be like, "I'm so tired. I want to rest." And then we got to get ready to fly again. Like, I wonder how much real good scrim time teams will have to adapt strategies. So yeah, maybe if you're like in Asia or like if you're in the south east where there's a little bit less extended travel, you might be able to get away with building some strategy like really quickly with other local teams that haven't traveled, and then kind of snipe somebody with it. I guess that could work.
Which team would you say will be like the Shock of stage one, the team that just has the cleanest fundamentals, that just executes the strongest, and then seems the most practiced? Obviously it's hard to tell, but if you can guess.
I mean, I would say just based on what we've seen so far, I was thinking that was going to be Spark, but I watched the Shanghai Masters match, and it's hard to judge them off of a show match series kind of tournament thing, but they didn't seem as clean as I expected, especially given that it's almost the same roster. But I mean, I think we have to point our fingers towards Shock here in this case. I mean, they're in Korea right now. They're scrimming in Korea, boot camping here. They kept essentially the same roster together from last season. They already have a ton of pre-built synergy, and I mean, again, we assume, right, they're going to be playing a pretty similar meta to what they played in the grand finals and in stage 4. So just mechanically, unless we have like, some team really come out of nowhere, they look pretty good. And then one of the other big question mark teams that could get a huge burst in terms of mechanical skill is Seoul, I guess, right? I mean, they brought in Profit and Gesture, and that's just an insane boost to, I think, their skill cap. I don't know how well their synergy is going to look together by the time we get stage 1, or quote unquote
Mm,
stage 1. So those are the ones I'm thinking
yeah.
about a lot.
If you would be having some influence over Seoul, would you recommend them to play to their strengths with more Winston comps, or advise them to go for the meta again and almost risk repeating London, when they played Goats in stage one?
It's tough to say because in Overwatch League, we have so many games, but even still, every time you try something and you lose, it's kind of like permanent. Can't really recover. And we saw Valiant went 0-7 at the beginning of the season this year, and then even though they played very well towards the end, they just couldn't get into the playoffs. They couldn't make
Mm,
it. It's risky. Like, if it were up to me, I'd probably say if we're finding success with Winston and scrims against other, similarly skilled teams, I'd be like, okay, let's give this a shot on some of the maps we think it's good on. Otherwise, focus on the meta. But if it's not doing that well in scrims, or if it feels like, okay, it's kind of a cheese strat, I'd probably just say stick to the meta,
mm,
just like
mm,
almost every time. Just because I feel like it's so risky, even if you have a player like Gesture who is so skilled on Winston. If you're trying to, go against the grind of the meta, and you've built a
mm,
new team, like they have, like they brought in Gesture, they brought in Profit, they lost Jaehong, completely different roster this year. Then you're really messing with a lot there. You're putting it all on the line for like Gesture's Winston, when you might just play standard to win the game. And you can learn how to play Winston if the meta is moving towards that. You don't want to ignore it, but I think in the actual tournament games, I'd probably, outside of like maybe a map or two, I'd push for meta
mm.
personally.
What would you say then about Charge, or maybe Fusion? Would you say they have pretty much everything in order to be a top tier team? Because you have great Hanzo players, you have great Pharah players, Mei, Widow, like you have almost the whole kit.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I do have my questions about Philly with Sato because he's been a little bit inconsistent over the last 2 seasons, let's be real. And we know he's a really good Winston player, just like we know Gesture is a good Winston player, so kind of a similar thing with
Mm,
that.
mm, mm, mm.
So that's where I think things could fall apart. I thought Sato's Orisa was like pretty good though. Not like amazing, not top 5 or anything like that, but I thought his Orisa was solid. That's kind of where I put my weakness for Billy. But yeah, when you look at Happy and Nero on charge, and you just think about like the fact they still have. So I honestly feel like Nero never even peaked in the season of Overwatch League. I feel like we only got to see like a taste of how good he really is. He's still so young. I think there's so much potential in that roster.
Yeah, it felt like he developed almost 2 times the normal player would during the season, because I remember he started out, kind of nervous, new, totally normal, but then he became more and more, how to say, really comfortable on the scene, and I could see the same change Super did from season 1 to season 2, for example.
Yeah.
Would you say like there's more players than Nero that comes to mind that would do the same transformation?
I mean,
almost?
I think I don't know. I almost want to say Happy, but I don't think I can. I think Happy's had enough experience under his belt where we kind of have to say like this is where he's at.
Mm,
I don't want to say he's going to like decline or anything like that, but we saw how good his Widow was, and he's also got like a pretty scary Hanzo, although Nero usually ends up playing that. I think that Happy is kind of like one of those players you look at him like Carpe, where we should be a little bit careful about saying he's one of the greatest Widow players in the world just because of a few great moments last season. Should wait and kind of see how that goes because Carpe had his moments too, but history showed that in 2019 he definitely was not even like top 3 in terms of Widowmaker play, in my opinion. I think Krong, by the way, I don't know how familiar you are with Krong, but he's been around for a really long time. He used to play with Geggery like way back in the day. He's a really good flex tank, and I think he's a huge pickup. He plays very differently than Hotba does. So obviously Hotba's moved into New York
mm,
Excelsior, but I think Krong is one of those players on the roster that has a lot of potential. He's never really played on a big stage like the Overwatch League before. Like he played in Apex, he played in Contenders, even though they were offline, right? They're kind of small compared to like what you would see at the Blizzard Arena this year or what we will see at homestand crowds next year. So
mm,
I think if he's trained properly and if he is, like keeps his mentality in check, the coaches are making sure he's not getting too stressed out in front of big crowds and stuff like that. I think his raw skill is absolutely there, and he's someone that I think could develop into a fantastic flex tank going into next season.
mm, mm, mm. So yeah, just one last topic here. How do you think the homestands will affect these rookie players? Do you think it'll be like a huge boost to most of them, like the same type of effect on veteran players, or more on rookie players, or even more for veteran players than rookie players?
See, I think it's more towards what the last one you just said there because I think this travel thing, people think about it like, well, he's tired, so he can't play or stuff like that. I think that's what people are focusing on. Like, well, can he play through the jet lag or et cetera, et cetera, when we talk about this player or that player? I think it's about oftentimes as someone who's, going to be 30 next year and is getting older, like I think a lot of travel, how it affects you is how old you are. I think for some of these players, they're so excited. So I guarantee there's some Korean players out there who are like, I am going to travel the world next year. That is so exciting to me. And no matter how long they're on planes and stuff, I think they're going to be so excited to be like, okay, I'm in Paris now. I'm in London now. I've never been to Europe before. Now I'm going to Dallas. This is so cool. I think the really young players and the rookie players are going to be, I think, less affected personally because it's not like the veteran players. Veteran players are generally just older, and it's not like they traveled a lot anyways. I mean, they traveled to 2 homestands, not even all of them, but some of them traveled to 2 homestands last year. And then the Korean players who played in Apex didn't really travel at all, until they moved to LA, but then they stayed in one place in LA. If you're a veteran player, you're generally just older. And I think if you're older, then traveling is harder because you've done it a few times. It's not as exciting anymore. Your back hurts faster than if you're a younger player. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
your like lack of sleep is going to affect you faster if you're an older player. Whereas all the 18-year-old guys who just signed on are like, I imagine, I mean, not everybody, like some people are scared of flying. Some people hate flying. Some people hate being in a hotel. Some people hate trying new foods. But I really think that a lot of the younger players are going to be really excited, especially the Korean players. Some of them who've never left the country before are going to be really excited to travel around the world.
that's what I feel as well. Anyways, thank you so much for joining us, Wolf.
No problem, man. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad that you could just give me some good information on players in the Watch League, but also some of the patch. Before we head off, what's your opinion on Torb getting buffed?
I'm always happy to see more Torbjorn in pro play. So I don't know if the 10% charge will really make that big of a difference, but I hope it does. I hope we see some more Torb strats. I used to love back in the old days the Torbjorn on like Nimbani A that we'd see Toby play, for example, or IDK. I miss those times. So I'm always excited to see Torb buffs for the pro scene.
Nice. All right. Do you have anything you want to plug? Do you have any social media videos? Put it out there.
I mean, just if you guys want to follow what I do on Twitter and Instagram, it's Proxywolf, and if you want to follow my stream, it's Wolf_Schroeder. You can find it pretty easily. I'm going to be doing a lot of content there during the next season of Overwatch League in 2020, so follow me on Twitch if you're interested in that.
Cool. Thanks so much, man. Thanks so much.
No problem, dude.
Make sure that you subscribe. Really helps a lot if you subscribe, and leave a comment if you like the content. Let me know what you think. Do you have any opinions, thoughts, ideas, questions? Feel free to let me know. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Hope you like it, and I'll see you later.